Hey, Saretsky here. Welcome back to the show. Lots to chat on this. We've got an update on inflation. We've got some updates from the Bank of Canada market odds ahead of the rate announcement next week, as well as what's happening in the rental market and in the labor market, as well as a landmark ruling in the city of Richmond regarding the First Nations. Richmond, city where I grew up and is near and dear to my heart. Going to walk you through exactly what's happening there and the implications, the larger implications for everybody moving forward, despite all the media headlines, etc. So, first and foremost, you have to touch on inflation coming in higher than expected, 2.4% on a year-over-year basis. Again, accelerating core prices, accelerating above the Bank of Canada's target. So one would think, maybe the Bank of Canada will hold rates. This will give them pause, but not so much because ultimately markets are looking through the noise, as am I, because one of the biggest contributors to this recent uptick in inflation was rents, rental market. So shelter costs and rents are rising as per Stats Canada, 4.7% year over year and 6.1% annualized over the past 3 months. You guys that have been following this channel for quite some time know that we've been tracking the rental market very, very closely. And there is not a single major metro in this country that is seeing rents accelerating higher. Does not exist. In fact, we can look at data from rentals.ca, which tracks asking rents in this country, and it's been showing declining rents for 12 consecutive months. Rents across Canada are declining. They are not accelerating despite stats can. And when rents and shelter account for a third of your CPI basket, this is a real distortion. That's ultimately why I think the Bank of Canada is going to look through this noise next week on October 29th. And that's why markets are currently pricing in about an 85% chance of a 25 basis point rate cut from the BOC. That's my view, 25 basis points as well. Market odds, again, market pricing is 85% odds of a rate cut from the BOC. You got to fade what is happening in the StatsCan rental market. The data basically relies on surveys of property managers, and a lot of times we'll track turnover rents, right? Which is to say, you have an old lady in this old apartment building. She's been there for 15 years. Suddenly, and she's paying $1,200 a month. Suddenly, she passes away. So she is out of the rental unit at $1,200 a month. And you now have a vacancy that gets filled at market rent today, which is $1,800. So that is what partially gets reflected in a lot of the StatsCan rental data, which again is very different than real-time asking rents across the country, which continue to fall in the vast majority of major metros. Again, pretty much in Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, you're down double digits from the highs in those markets, and there's still more downwards pressure with the record number of rental units under construction today that will become completing over the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. And so those rental markets are going to be and are well supplied today. So the Bank of Canada will fade that, the 85% chance of a rate cut next week on the 29th. If you're a home seller, this isn't going to change it. All I've been hearing all year is about how rate cuts are going to turn the market around, and it really has done the opposite. And it's done the opposite because this is not a cost of borrowing problem today. We have a problem with confidence. People are worried about the state of the economy. You can see that in the survey numbers, and you can see it in they're worried about the economy and they're worried about their jobs. If you're worried about losing your job, you're probably not going to go out and make a large financial decision. You're probably not going to go out there and take a much larger mortgage unless you're absolutely certain and confident in your financial position and in your job. And I think that's what ultimately people are worried about. They're worried about the economy, worried about Trump, the tariff stuff, all the layoffs you keep hearing on the news. It is happening in real time. The labor market is soft. And this is ultimately what is giving people pause, and that's allowed the inventory to build up and the prices to come down. It is baked into the cake. Nothing is going to change in the market from today at the end of October through to the end of the year. If you're selling a home today and the Bank of Canada cuts rates next week, consider it a savings grace, so to speak, which is to say Take it, run with it. It's not going to change any of the market conditions. You can pretend that it will, but it won't. So if you're holding on to your price, Bank of Canada next week is not going to save you. Um, and that is my view. That's what I'm seeing on the ground. Too many sellers making the mistake, chasing the market lower, too slow to adapt to the market conditions, hoping, hoping that Tiff Macklin with the BOC is going to cut rates once or twice and subtly change the market. This is a much different environment that we're in today. As well as speaking of much different market that we're in today, city of Richmond, again, a place where I grew up. There is a huge court ruling, BC Supreme Court ruling around the First Nations, effectively a First Nations ban. Was hunting and fishing on these lands 150 years ago. There was no treaty, so the Supreme Court ruled that, well, hey, you can have two titles. You can have the First Nations; they have their title there, and you have the private fee simple title here. So they said, in their words, the law said these can coexist. So they took over 700 acres, are basically up in dispute today. And so I said, this has massive impacts. We have the city of Richmond mayor sending out letters in the mail to all these homeowners saying, listen, your title, your ownership could be impacted moving forward. This could impact the state and the status of your title. Now, again, this country is built on private property rights. And if you can't uphold those, you have a real problem. Now, I had all these people sending me emails and these guys sending me these technical jargons and saying, well, listen, the letter of the law is, we have this in our constitution that we were supposed to negotiate with the First Nations. And we haven't done the Canadian government has not upheld their negotiations to basically, give reparations to these First Nations. And so the two titles, they can coexist. They're not stealing anybody's property. The First Nations aren't coming there, kicking you out of your condo and taking the keys. So there's nothing to worry about. This is all getting overblown by the media. And I said, well, okay. I mean, let's take real life examples here. Go into your bank tomorrow and tell the bank that you coexist. You have two titles. You coexist with the First Nations, and let me know what they say. Because in reality, how it works in real life, not in academia, not legal verbiage that some judge has decided. How it works in real life is the banks will say, is it freehold or are you on First Nations land? What is the status? Who owns this? You cannot have in real life, you cannot have two titles that coexist. So what is happening today is banks are not lending on the properties that are currently in dispute. They are not lending. If you can't get a loan and if you can't get a mortgage on these properties, you have no liquidity. Nobody's going to go out there and make $1 million condo investment or house purchase or build a warehouse on property that is undecided. It is up in the air, and they're right now saying you have two titles that coexist. Banks run a business. If there is no certainty around the ownership structure of the land, you do not lend money on those properties. And if you don't lend money on those properties, they are not liquid and they are not investable today. And that is the problem ultimately that I think some people are missing anyways, which is to say roughly 90% of all land in British Columbia is unceded, which effectively means the BC government or federal government, they've never actually negotiated treaties with all these First Nations groups. So they're saying, well, if all this land is effectively unceded, the Richmond case might just be the tip of the iceberg. What prevents a different First Nations band from going and disputing a different parcel of land is somewhere else in the province. And then another one falls, and another one falls, another one falls. And so all of a sudden, you have all this land that is being sort of disputed or negotiated with. It creates all of this uncertainty, which is to say these negotiations now are going to take place to say, okay, who gets title to the land? If you give it back, sort of, and you got to pay them out. You got to pay out the First Nations band effectively. And so these negotiations don't happen overnight. These could potentially draw out for years negotiating with all of these First Nations bands, which ultimately puts a lot of uncertainty. And again, you won't be able to effectively invest as a company or in the land until you have absolute certainty that you own the land today and tomorrow you would still own the land. And so that is the big problem. It's not so much that, well, hold on a minute, nobody's coming in and kicking anybody out and taking the keys. That's not the point that is being made. The point is you cannot have what the court is saying, two titles coexisting. That doesn't work in real life. It might work in the court size, but it doesn't work in real life. And so that is the crux of the issue today. I think it's significant. Obviously, you're hearing about, the BC government says they're going to appeal, and everybody's watching this because this ultimately puts all of this land effectively up for discussion, and these discussions can be long and lengthy. And I suspect that this Richmond case won't be the last of them. There'll be probably more. So it is a huge, huge issue. Again, regardless of your political views on reconciliation and or all of that, it has nothing to do with that. It's just we're strictly talking about it from the real estate market, from the investment perspective, and the implications of this moving forward and how this could all play out. So that's my view. If you own a condo, literally, if you own a condo in this land, and there's a bunch of them for sale, because I actually used to rent in that pocket along the river there on 6th Road behind basically the movie theater, that land, those condo units that are listed for sale today, they ain't selling. They're not going to sell. So imagine if you're a homeowner today living in that condo, in a 1-bedroom condo, and you just had, your second kid and you're desperate for more space and you want to sell and move on, you're probably stuck. So the case is significant. It has major ramifications because, again, I suspect and worry that ultimately Richmond might not be the last of it. There could be more claims coming down the pipe given this landmark ruling that happened in the BC Supreme Court. So, as always, we'll watch this, continue to monitor this, keep an eye on the BOC next week, and we'll see you next week.